Jace Calder was a man who rode with the sun at his back and the past nipping at his heels. Folks around the frontier spoke his name in low tones, sometimes in respect, sometimes in warning, but mostly in curiosity. A man like him didn't wander forever without reason. Somewhere between the ranch he buried under dust and the woman he loved and lost, Jace had left the pieces of himself scattered across the West. All he carried now was a saddlebag of necessities and a heart gone hollow. The day he rode into Perdition Creek, the sky was the flat, punishing blue of a summer that refused to break. Dust trailed him like a loyal shadow, swirling around the hooves of his roan mar. Jace had been avoiding towns for months, preferring open plains to crowded saloons and gossiping locals, but his supplies had dwindled to crumbs and lukewarm water. Even a man who wanted little needed something to keep body and soul tied together. Perdition Creek wasn't much to look at, just a scattering of wooden buildings leaning into the wind like tired old men a-watering, trough a livery and a single street that seemed too wide for the quiet that filled it, the kind of town that thrived only because it lay between other, better towns. But it had a general store and a bakery, and that was enough to draw Jace in. As he rode down the main road, heads turned, though subtly. Women sweeping porches paused mid-stroke. A pair of old-timers on a bench exchanged muttered guesses about who the stranger might be. A dog barked from the shade beneath the saloon's porch, sensing something unfamiliar in the air. Jace ignored it all. He wasn't here to stir trouble or invite conversation. He was here to buy flour, coffee, jerky, and leave before his presence unsettled anyone. He tied his horse at the post, giving the mare a gentle pat before stepping off. His boots hit the ground with the solid thud of a man used to carrying weight of the world, of responsibility, of regret. Inside the general store, Jace kept his voice low, his words short. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with spectacles, didn't pry. Business was business. Coins exchanged hands, and Jace packed away what he needed with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been living out of saddlebags too long. When he stepped back outside, the scent of warm bread drifted on the wind, tugging memories he'd rather leave untouched. Once, he'd come home every evening to the smell of biscuits, laughter, and soft hands smoothing over his tired shoulders. But once was a lifetime ago. He tried to shake the thought away and headed toward the bakery. That was when he saw her. At first he thought she was a bundle of discarded cloth slumped by the wall-white fabric smeared with dust, a veil tangled around her shoulders like a defeated flag. But then she moved. A slow, weak shift. A woman. Her face was pale beneath the grime, her lips cracked, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her stomach. The dress she wore, what was left of it, was unmistakably a wedding gown, torn at the hem, streaked with dirt, the lace frayed as though she'd run through brush and bramble. Her eyes lifted to his. Hunger lived in them, but something else too, fear, and a kind of desperate hope that stunned him more than anything. "Sir," she whispered, voice barely a breath. "Just a piece of bread." "Please." Jace froze. He had come to Perdition Creek to avoid people, avoid entanglements, avoid caring. But in that moment, looking at the starving bride slumped on the ground, he knew trouble had found him anyway. And something in him, something long dormant, stirred awake. For a long, suspended moment, Jace simply stood there, the sun beating down on his shoulders, dust swirling around his boots, while the woman in the torn wedding dress stared up at him with hollow, pleading eyes. He'd seen hunger before, real hunger, the kind that clawed at a person's insides until pride didn't matter anymore. But something about her, sitting in the dirt in a garment meant for joy, felt wrong in a way that struck deeper than he expected. She looked like a ghost of a life that had gone terribly, abruptly sideways. Jace's first instinct was to look around, to see who she belonged to. No woman dressed for marriage simply ended up begging outside a bakery without someone noticing family, friends, a husband. But the street remained strangely muted, almost holding its breath. Folks passing by stole glances at her, some pitying, others uncomfortable, but none of them stopped. None of them helped. Jace didn't like that. It pricked something inside him, a quiet, simmering irritation at a world that stepped around pain instead of addressing it. He crouched down slowly, making sure she saw his hands were empty. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "how long since you ate?" Her gaze unfocused for a moment, as though she had to search through fog to answer. "Since yesterday morning, maybe." She swallowed hard. "Might have been longer." Her voice sounded like wind through brittle grass. Jace stood, pushed open the bakery door, and bought 2 loaves, one soft and fresh, the other yesterday's bread, sold half price. When he knelt beside her again and tore a piece off, she snatched it with surprising speed, then paused, embarrassed, before chewing carefully as if afraid it might disappear. She didn't eat like someone who'd merely skipped a meal. She ate like someone who hadn't known safety in far too long. "I don't mean to pry," Jace said, keeping his tone gentle. "But that's a wedding dress." Her fingers stilled around the crust. The bread seemed to turn heavy in her lap. "It was," she whispered. "Now it's just fabric." The veil, once white, now hung limp and gray around her shoulders. The bodice was ripped down the side, the lace snagged as if she'd torn free of someone's grip or something worse. Jace felt his jaw tense. "Did someone hurt you?" he asked. Her eyes darted up, then away. "I'd rather not say." "Not here." She took another bite, smaller this time, as if shame had slowed her hunger. "People here. They already know more than they let on." Jace followed her gaze. The same pair of old-timers sat on their bench. A woman across the street pretended to sweep but was clearly listening. The town wasn't unfriendly, it was cautious, careful, afraid of something, or someone. He shifted to sit beside her, giving her space yet offering presence. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then said, "Ellery Grant." He nodded. "I'm Jace." She looked at him for a long moment, studying the brutal years etched into his face and the quiet steadiness in his eyes. Then, almost timidly, she asked, "Why did you stop?" "I had extra," he lied. Truth was, he didn't know. Something in him had simply refused to walk away. Ellery brushed crumbs from her lap, though she saved every morsel. "People here don't help strangers," she murmured. "Especially not ones running from something." Running. Jace caught the word. So she was fleeing. And from the state of her dress, her empty stomach, and the tremor in her hands, she'd been running hard. "Ellery," he said quietly, "is someone after you?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, her body went rigid, her eyes locking onto something behind him. Jace's hand went to the butt of his revolver as he turned. Down the dusty street, 3 men were riding in, hard, purposeful, the kind of men who weren't coming for supplies. Ellery whispered, voice trembling, "They found me." The 3 riders came in slow enough not to raise alarm, but quick enough for anyone with sense to feel the tension ripple across Perdition Creek. Their silhouettes shimmered in the heat, dust rising in coils behind their horses. Jace didn't need special insight to know exactly what kind of men they were, broad-shouldered, armed, disciplined. They rode like wolves following a scent. Ellery shrank beside him, pulling her torn veil close as if it could make her invisible. "Stay calm," Jace murmured, rising to his feet but keeping his body angled to shield her. "They may not be here for you." But he didn't believe that, and from the way she trembled, neither did she. The riders slowed as they reached the bakery. One of them, a younger man with a long scar across his cheek, scanned the street. His gaze skimmed right over Ellery at first, her face lowered, veil shadowing her features. Jace's stance caught his attention instead. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "You there," he called. "Seen a woman come through? White dress?" Looked spooked. The lie perched on Jace's tongue, ready to leap, but he didn't speak. "Not yet." "Why are you looking for her?" The scarred man spat into the dust. Bride got cold feet. Groom's word should come to harm. We're just returning her to where she belongs. Ellery made a faint sound, something between a scoff and a sob. Jace didn't turn toward her, but he heard it clearly. So did the rider. There. The scarred man's expression sharpened. I heard that voice. He swung off his horse, boots hitting the dirt with a thud of certainty. The other two followed. Ellery let out a tiny broken breath. Jace, please. And there it was. The moment the world tilted, he could walk away. Tell her it wasn't his fight. Let the men drag her back to whoever she'd run from. It would be the simplest thing, clean, detached, exactly the way he'd lived for years. But every instinct he'd tried to bury stirred violently awake. The instincts of a man who once knew right from wrong and hadn't yet surrendered to indifference. He spoke quietly, without looking at her. Ellery, tell me the truth now. Why were you running? Her fingers clutched the skirt of her ruined dress. Because I wasn't supposed to survive the wedding night. Jace stiffened. Before he could ask more, the scarred rider strode forward. You, he pointed at Ellery. Get up, you're coming with us. Jace stepped into his path. She doesn't look like she wants to go. The man barked a short laugh. Ain't about what she wants. Her groom wants her back. And trust me, friend, you don't want to cross Silas Kern. Jace felt Ellery flinch at the name. Silas Kern, a powerful cattle baron, wealthy, influential, the kind of man who believed everything and everyone was his property. Jace had crossed men like that before. It never ended peacefully. Scarface shoved a hand toward Ellery. Up, now. Ellery backed into the wall, shaking. Jace, she whispered, voice cracking. If they take me back, he'll kill me. Silas only wanted to marry me for my father's land for the water rights. I overheard his men talking. Once he got what he wanted, he planned to make it look like I ran away and died in the canyon. A tragic accident, her breath hitched. He never loved me. He never even wanted me alive. The street went dead silent. Jace felt something old and dark rise in him, a protective anger he hadn't felt since before tragedy hollowed him out. The scarred man smirked. She talks too much. Let's go. Jace's stance changed, subtle but unmistakable weight balanced, right hand ready. You're not taking her. The rider paused. You looking for a bullet, cowboy? No, Jace said, voice low and razor steady. But I'm not afraid to give one. A murmur rippled across the few townsfolk watching. Ellery stared at Jace as if he'd just hauled her out of a raging river. Scarface's hand dropped to his gun. Jace's eyes hardened. The runaway bride's secret had shattered any chance of peace, and Jace knew exactly what came next. The air in Perdition Creek thickened until it felt like even the dust refused to move. 3 riders, 1 starving woman, and a cowboy who hadn't planned on being anyone as savior, but now stood squarely in the path of danger. Scarface's fingers brushed the butt of his revolver, testing Jace's resolve. He wasn't used to being told no, least of all by a stranger. Behind him, the other 2 men spread out subtly, boxing Jace in without drawing too much attention. Professional muscle, seasoned, confident. They clearly assumed Jace was just another drifter passing through. They were wrong. Ellery's breath stuttered behind him, each inhale sharp and afraid. Jace could feel her terror ripple through the space between them. She was so slight, so fragile, she didn't even cast a proper shadow on the dirt. Whatever she'd survived to reach Perdition Creek, it had stripped her down to her last ounce of fight, but not her last ounce of hope. And inexplicably, she'd placed that hope in him. Scarface clicked his tongue once. Back away, cowboy. This ain't your business. It is now, Jace said. You don't know who you're crossing. I heard. Jace's jaw tightened. Silas Kern. The name hung in the air like poison. Even the woman with the broom across the street stopped pretending to work. Her eyes darted between the men and Jace, worry etched across her face. Everyone in Perdition Creek knew the reach of Silas Kern, knew his anger, knew that crossing him meant trouble that spread like wildfire. And yet no one stepped in, because no one could. "You going to hand her over?" Scarface asked, voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "No." The man's smile was cold. "Then you're a dead man." His hand twitched toward his gun. Jace didn't hesitate. Lightning fast, he shifted his stance, ready to draw faster than the man expected. But before steel cleared leather, a shout broke from down the street. "Stop!" A storekeeper, broad-shouldered, apron still on, strode forward. Not brave enough to intervene, but willing enough to try talking sense. "Take your trouble elsewhere. This is a quiet town. We don't want gunfire scaring decent folk. Then make this cowboy step aside," Scarface snapped. "We protect our own here," the storekeeper said. Jace knew that wasn't true. They hadn't protected Ellery at all, but he appreciated the attempt. Scarface sneered, then turned back to Ellery. "The girl comes with us, or we'll burn this whole street to ash. Silas wants his bride back. Alive. For now." Ellery made a strangled sound. "Jace, please don't let them take me." Her voice cracked around the word please like it hurt. Something ancient and instinctive surged inside Jace, an old instinct he'd long smothered. The instinct to protect, to shield the vulnerable, to use his skill not just to survive, but to stand for someone who needed standing for. He took one step back, not retreating, but placing himself physically in front of her. "It's over," he said to the riders. "Turn around. Ride back. Tell Silas his bride got lost. Tell him she crossed state lines. Tell him whatever the hell you want, just not that she's here." Scarface laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "Cross Kern? Lie to him? You don't know the man." Jace's eyes hardened like steel cooled in a bucket. "Don't need to." The other rider, older, with silver stubble and dead eyes, finally spoke. "Jace Calder," he said quietly. "That's who you are, ain't it?" Scarface stiffened. The third man cursed under his breath. Recognition washed over all three like a cold wind. Jace didn't react. He didn't need to. His reputation, once a burden, now a weapon, spoke for him. The older rider's voice dropped. "Silas ain't gonna like this." Jace replied, "Silas doesn't need to like it. He just needs to stay away." The men exchanged looks, calculating, unsettled. They weren't cowards, but they weren't stupid either. "This ain't over," Scarface finally hissed. "No," Jace agreed. "It isn't." The three mounted their horses, retreating not defeated, just forced back. For now, as they galloped out of town, Ellery sagged against the wall, trembling. Jace didn't turn around. He watched the men disappear in a cloud of dust, knowing exactly what their retreat meant. Silas Kern's interest in the runaway bride wasn't over. Not even close. And now Jace Calder had put himself squarely in the cattle baron's crosshairs. The street slowly exhaled once the riders disappeared beyond the rise, but Jace didn't relax, not even a fraction. Men like that didn't retreat because they'd been convinced. They retreated because they needed to regroup, report, and plan. The real storm hadn't hit yet. Behind him, Ellery slid down the wall until she was sitting again, folding into herself like she was trying to vanish. Her wedding gown pooled around her in dusty folds, a ghost of the life she'd nearly been forced into. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking silently. Jace turned, ran a hand over his jaw, and took a slow breath. He wasn't good with tears. Or people. Or fragile things that trusted too easily. He'd spent years avoiding all of that. But walking away now? Leaving her like this? That wasn't something his conscience, rusted as it was, could stomach. He knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her. "You all right?" She let out a shaky, humorless laugh. "Do I look all right?" "Fair point." "No," he admitted. "You look like you've been through hell." She lowered her hands, revealing eyes too tired for someone her age. "I have," she swallowed, voice barely a whisper. "They'll come back, won't they?" Yes, Jace said, because she deserved the truth. Men like that never give up the first time, especially when they're working for someone as powerful as Silas Kern. Fear rippled across her features. Then I have to leave. I'll run farther this time. I'll find someplace he won't look. Jace shook his head. He'll look everywhere. And those men will search every town within 100 miles. She paled even more. Her fingers twisted in her tattered skirt. Then what am I supposed to do? The question landed heavy. Jace wasn't sure himself. He'd learned a long time ago that saving someone wasn't as simple as chasing off a few hired guns. Saving someone meant responsibility, commitment, staying, all the things he'd sworn never to take on again. But when he looked at Ellery starving, exhausted, shaking, he saw someone who'd already run out of miracles. And maybe, just maybe, he still had one left to give. He stood and extended a hand. You're coming with me. Ellery blinked, confused. With you? Why? Because staying here isn't safe. He scanned the street. In the windows, townsfolk watched with a mix of pity, worry, and gratitude. But none stepped forward. None offered help. Not because they didn't care, because they were terrified of Silas Kern. And because you can't run on foot in that condition. Those men will track you before sundown. She hesitated, glancing at his calloused hand as if afraid touching it might obligate her to something. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. How do you know? He paused, then said softly, because if you were, I wouldn't be offering. Something flickered in her eyes' hope, fragile and raw. Slowly she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but they fit into his palm like she'd been waiting for someone to reach her before she collapsed completely. Jace pulled her gently to her feet. She swayed, and without thinking, he steadied her with a hand at her back. We'll go to my horse, he said. I've got a safe place outside town. A line shack no one uses. You can rest there tonight. We'll figure the next step after. Why are you helping me? She asked again, voice softer, searching. Jace didn't look at her when he answered. Because someone should have helped you long before now. A tear slid down her cheek, not from fear, but from the shock of kindness she hadn't expected. He lifted her onto his mar, tightening the cinch and checking the reins. When he mounted behind her, Ellery leaned back instinctively, seeking the steady warmth he carried like a shield. As they rode out of Perdition Creek, the townsfolk returned to their routines, but their eyes followed the pair until they disappeared into the shimmering horizon. Jace hadn't planned to get involved. He hadn't planned for anything at all. But now he'd made a promise, a quiet one, spoken in the way he lifted her, protected her, chose her. And Jace Calder wasn't a man who broke his word. Not anymore. The sun dipped low by the time Jace and Ellery reached the line shack, a weathered cabin tucked against a rocky outcrop, half swallowed by sagebrush. It wasn't much to look at, but it was remote, hidden, the kind of place a man chose when he wanted to be forgotten. Jace dismounted first, then helped Ellery down. Her legs wobbled the moment her feet hit the ground, and she gripped his arm for balance. He steadied her without comment. She met his eyes with a flush of embarrassment. Sorry, she murmured. Don't be, he said. You've had a day. A lifetime, he corrected silently. He pushed the shack door open. It creaked like it hadn't been used in months, which was true. Inside, the air smelled faintly of earth and wood smoke. A single cot leaned against the far wall, a small stove sat in the corner, and dust lay thick on everything. Sit, he said gently, pointing to the cot. I'll get a fire going. Ellery perched on the edge like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up space. While Jace knelt by the stove and sparked tinder, she watched him with an expression somewhere between wariness and wonder, like she couldn't quite understand why he was helping her at all. When the flame caught, warm light filled the tiny room, chasing shadows into the corners. Ellery exhaled softly, finally letting some of the tension drain from her shoulders. Jace stood, brushing dirt from his hands. I've got food in my saddlebags. Not much, but better than nothing. He pulled out jerky, a tin of beans, and part of the loaf she hadn't finished earlier. When he handed her the bread first, she hesitated. You eat too, she said. I will. But she didn't take the bread. Together? She asked, voice small. He paused, surprised by the request. But when he realized why she asked, because she hadn't had company she could trust, because meals for her had been stolen or begged or eaten alone, his chest tightened in a way he didn't want to examine. Sure, he said, sitting beside her on the cot. They ate quietly. Ellery's bites were small, careful, as though she feared being told to stop at any moment. Jace kept the conversation light. You ran far, he finally said. She nodded without looking up. 15 miles from the ranch, maybe more. I didn't stop to think. What made you run? What happened exactly? Her hands tightened around the bread. A long silence stretched between them before she finally whispered, I overheard Silas talking to his foreman the night before the wedding. He said once he had my father's land, I'd be inconvenient. Jace's jaw clenched. He planned to put me in a wagon, she continued, voice trembling. Push it over the canyon ridge. Say I panicked and fled during the wedding celebration. A tragic end to a grieving heiress. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. No one would question a man like Silas. The fire snapped sharply, mirroring the tension that built inside Jace. You were right to run, he said. You were smart, she shook her head. I wasn't smart enough. If you hadn't been there today, they would have dragged me back kicking and screaming. Maybe, he said, but you're here now. You're safe. For tonight, at least. The words settled between them, warm and heavy. Her eyes softened. It's been a long time since I felt safe, she whispered. Jace shifted, uncomfortable with the vulnerability pulsing in her voice. He wasn't good with fragile emotions, but he found himself needing to protect hers. You should sleep, he said, rising. I'll take the floor. No. She reached for his sleeve instinctively. You don't have to. I do, he said gently. You need rest. Real rest. Reluctantly, she yielded, pulling the thin blanket over herself. Jace rolled out his own coat onto the floorboards. Before he lay down, he checked the door latch twice, then positioned himself where he'd hear anyone approach. Silence stretched. The fire crackled. Jace? Ellery's voice was soft, tentative. Why did you really help me? He stared at the ceiling. Because you looked at me like I was your last chance. A breath shuddered out of her. Not fear this time, something warmer. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't respond. Couldn't. But as the fire dimmed and night wrapped around the shack, Jace realized something unsettling. Protecting her didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. Dawn seeped slowly into the shack, pale and hesitant, painting the floorboards in soft gold. Jace was awake before the first rays touched the window. He'd slept light, if he'd slept at all. Years on the trail had trained him to rest with one ear open, one hand close to his revolver, and last night had been no different. Except something was. The shack felt warmer somehow. Not from the dying embers in the stove, but from the quiet breath of the woman sleeping just feet away. Ellery's presence had changed the space, softened its edges. Jace wasn't used to sharing a room with anyone, much less someone who trusted him enough to sleep deeply. She shifted, sighing softly in her dreams, and Jace found himself watching her longer than he should. Without fear etched across her features, she looked younger. Vulnerable in the kind of way that stirred a protective ache low in his chest. He tore his gaze away. No good would come of staring. Outside, a hawk cried sharp, warning. Jace stood, slid open the door, and stepped into the crisp morning air. The world was quiet, but not empty. His instincts prickled. The prairie wasn't just waking, it was listening. Something was coming. He scanned the horizon, muscles coiled, eyes narrowing at a distant puff of dust, a single rider moving fast. Too fast. Jace's heart kicked once, hard. Only one kind of man rode with that urgency at dawn. A scout. He re-entered the shack and shut the door with a slow, steady click. Ellery sat up instantly, startled. Her hair, tousled from sleep, tumbled around her face. "Jace? What is it?" "They're close." Fear flickered across her face, but she swallowed it down. "Silas's men?" Jace nodded. "At least one. Maybe more behind him." Her hands twisted in the blanket. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Because they know these lands," he said. "Better than most. And Silas has money buys trackers, dogs, men who can follow a footprint across rock." Ellery paled. "Then I led them right to you." He shook his head. "No, they were coming either way. Silas isn't the kind to give up once he's set his mind on something." She looked at him, voice trembling. "And now you're in danger because of me." "Ellery," he said, taking a step closer, "I made my choice yesterday. I'm not taking it back." Her lips parted, but before she could respond, a distant shout echoed too faint for ordinary ears, but Jace caught it. He grabbed his hat and gun belt. "We need to move." Ellery stood on unsteady legs. "Move where?" "Away from here. There's a ravine north of us, narrow, steep, easy to defend." He hesitated. "And hard for horses to navigate. They'll have to dismount. And if they catch up?" Jace holstered his revolver. "Then I deal with it." There was no bravado in his voice, just calm, lethal certainty. The tone of a man who'd drawn on more than his share of enemies, who'd lived with blood on his hands long enough to no longer flinch from it. She stepped toward him. "Jace, you said yesterday you weren't looking for trouble." He slipped his saddlebag over his shoulder. "Sometimes trouble finds you anyway." "And me?" she whispered. He met her gaze, steady and unyielding. "You're not trouble." The words hit her harder than gunfire would have. Outside, hoofbeats pounded closer. Several horses now, not one. Jace cursed under his breath. "They found the trail," he said. "We've got minutes." Ellery grabbed her torn veil, still clutching it like a lifeline. Jace gently took it from her hands and tossed it aside. "You don't need that anymore." Her breath hitched, but she nodded. Together they rushed out the back of the shack. Jace boosted her onto the mare with practiced ease and mounted behind her. His arm braced around her waist as they kicked into a gallop. Behind them, shadows crested the ridge riders, armed and eager. Ellery gasped. "They're here!" Jace leaned close, voice steady as stone. Let them come, because he wasn't running anymore. Not from danger. Not from his past. And certainly not from the fight that had found him. He'd protected her once. He wasn't done yet. Dawn broke like a blood-orange smear across the horizon, painting the Badlands in shades of copper and fire. Jace Calder stepped out of the line shack with his hat pulled low, adjusting the gun belt that hadn't sat on his hips in years. The leather felt heavier than it used to. Or maybe it was the weight of what he was about to do. Behind him, Ellery stood in the doorway, wrapped in the threadbare blanket he'd given her. Her silhouette trembled just slightly, fear, cold, or the helpless urge to call him back. He didn't look over his shoulder. If he did, it might weaken his resolve. He had made her a promise. She would not go back to Silas Kern, not alive and not in chains. The wind carried the low rumble of hooves. Not many, maybe 6 riders, but each one armed, and each one with Silas's brand of ruthlessness. The men crested the ridge like wolves scenting blood. Dust rolled behind them in a brown plume. Jace stepped away from the shack, making himself visible. No trickery, no ambush. A straight, honest fight. He was done hiding. The first man to ride forward was Holt Casey, Silas's top gun hand. Holt spit in the dirt and grinned around a toothpick. "Well, hell. It's the Calder kid all grown up and still making bad decisions." Jace didn't bother replying. Holt didn't deserve the words. You got something of ours, Holt continued, nodding toward the shack. Silas wants the girl. Hand her over and maybe we'll leave enough of you for the undertaker to close the coffin. Jace's voice was quiet, but it cut through the wind like steel. She ain't yours, and she ain't going back. The other riders shifted, muttering. They knew Jace's reputation, even if he tried to bury it. Once upon a time, before grief hollowed him out, he had been the fastest gun across 3 counties. A legend whispered in saloons and outlaw dens. Holt sneered. You? You're half a ghost, Calder. And ghosts don't win gunfights. Jace slid his coat aside, resting one hand near his Colt. Try me. The air snapped taut. The horses snorted, sensing the tension crackling along their riders' reins. In the doorway, Ellery pressed a hand to her mouth. She wanted to scream, to beg him not to do this. But she saw the shape of his stance calm, balanced, certain. This wasn't a man going to his death. This was a man reclaiming the parts of himself he'd buried to survive heartbreak. Holt went for his gun first. Jace didn't think, just moved. A flash of metal, a thunderclap. Holt toppled from his horse before his gun cleared the holster. The other riders panicked, firing wildly. Jace dropped behind a boulder, bullets splitting the air above him like hornets. He waited for the rhythm, the familiar pulse of a fight settling into clarity. Then he rose, fired twice, and 2 more men fell. The remaining riders tried to flank him. Jace bounded down the slope, using sagebrush and rock as cover. Every shot he took was precise, clean, practiced. The old instincts hadn't died. They'd just been sleeping. In minutes, the ridge fell silent. Holt groaned in the dirt, clutching his side, staring up at Jace with hatred and fear. You're fighting the wrong battle, Holt rasped. Silas ain't done. He'll come for her himself. Let him, Jace said coldly. I'll be waitin'. He stepped back as the dying light of dawn washed over the bodies. Dust from the ridge drifted down, settling like ashes at a burial. Jace turned toward the line shack. Ellery stood there, eyes shining with shock and something deeper, something like awe. She had seen him fight like a man who finally remembered why he deserved to live. When he reached her, she touched his cheek with trembling fingers. Jace, she whispered. You saved me. He shook his head. No, Ellery. I'm just getting started. The real fight Silas himself was still coming. And Jace Calder was no longer running. The sun dipped low behind the mesas, painting Perdition Creek in bruised shades of orange and purple. Smoke from the ridge still hung faintly in the air, a reminder of the fight that had passed, but more importantly, a warning of the one still to come. Jace and Ellery had returned to the line shack, battered but unbroken. Ellery sat on the cot, her hands folded in her lap, trying to catch her breath. For the first time since he had found her, she looked like she wasn't running, like she had a choice to stay. Her torn wedding dress, dust-streaked and frayed, lay around her like a shroud she'd survived rather than a prison she'd fled. Jace leaned against the wall, silently counting the spent bullets in his holster and thinking of the ones he hadn't fired. He'd spent his life running from danger, from loss, from love, but tonight he hadn't run. Not once. Ellery looked up at him, eyes bright but cautious. Why did you do it? Why did you stay? He met her gaze, the firelight casting shadows that etched his rugged features. Because no one should be chased like that, and because... He paused, letting the words form slowly. I don't run from people who need help anymore. Her lips parted, a soft breath escaping her. She had been a bride who had begged for bread just days ago, fragile and desperate. Yet now she met his eyes with a steadiness that belied her ordeal. The hunger in her gaze had shifted, not for food, but for safety, for freedom, for the chance to live her own life. I never thought anyone would come, she said softly. Not really. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was resolve now. And yet... You did, he shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it needed doing. Ellery stood, dusting off the remnants of her torn dress. She looked at him, not as a woman saved by a stranger, but as a person reclaiming her agency. Then I choose to stay. Not because I'm afraid, but because I trust you, and I want to fight my own fight with you by my side. Jace's chest tightened at her words. The fragile hope that had wavered in her eyes for so long now burned bright. She wasn't pleading anymore. She wasn't begging. She was standing, steady and unflinching, willing to face whatever came next. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. I've spent too long running, too long alone. You don't have to be alone anymore, she said, stepping closer. Her hand hovered near his, trembling slightly, then she pressed it into his palm. Not with me. For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside the shack was silent but tense, the faint echoes of Silas Kern's wrath still lingering like a storm on the horizon. But inside, a quiet understanding settled between them two souls battered, yes, but determined to face what came next together. Jace finally nodded. All right. We face it together. She smiled a soft, real smile, the kind that only came after surviving something unimaginable. Then let's finish this, she said, her voice firm, filled with courage. Together, they stepped outside the shack, side by side. The ridge loomed in the distance, the memory of the fight still fresh, yet neither of them flinched. Jace glanced at Ellery and realized something he hadn't seen in years. He wasn't just protecting her. He was part of something bigger now, a partnership, a promise, a future that neither of them had dared imagine before. Tonight, the runaway bride was no longer begging for bread. She was ready to stand, to fight, and to claim the life she had been denied. And for the first time in a long time, Jace Calder knew he wasn't alone either. Hand in hand, they turned toward the horizon, ready to meet whatever came next, with courage, with resolve, and together. The first light of morning spilled over the horizon, painting the prairie in gold and rose. Jace Calder and Ellery Grant rode side by side, their horses kicking up a gentle dust trail behind them. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the world seemed still, unhurried, and forgiving. The battles they had faced, the fight with Silas's men, the constant flight, the fear that had clung like a shadow felt distant, replaced by the tentative warmth of hope. Ellery's hand brushed against Jace's as they rode. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. There was no fear, no need for protection in that moment, only trust. And Jace, hardened by years of solitude, felt a weight lift from his chest he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Where exactly are we going? Ellery asked softly, glancing at the endless stretch of rolling plains. Jace smiled faintly. Your land, he said, your father's ranch. The one Silas tried to take from you. It's still there, waiting. Her eyes widened. It survived? Barely, he admitted, but it's ours now. We can start over. The thought of a new beginning stirred something deep inside Ellery, a mixture of relief, excitement, and disbelief. After the terror of the past days, after the betrayal and near death, the idea of home felt almost unreal. She had fled a life where she had no power, no voice, no hope. Now, she had both a protector and the chance to claim her inheritance, her freedom, her future. They rode in silence for a while, letting the rhythm of their horses' hooves carry them forward. The horizon stretched endlessly, but it no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a promise, a blank canvas where they could paint a life together. Finally, Jace spoke. We'll have to fix the fences, clear the fields, and rebuild the house. It won't be easy, but it'll be ours. Every nail, every beam, every corner. Ellery laughed softly, a sound that was lighter than it had been in months. I think I can handle that. I've learned a few things in my time running for my life. He shook his head, smiling despite himself. I'm not worried about your skills. I'm worried about your heart. You're too stubborn to quit, even when it's hard. Just like me. She leaned slightly against him as they rode, her hand finding his again. Then I guess we're a good match. Two stubborn people, taking on the world. Jace glanced at her, catching the spark of determination in her eyes. It mirrored his own, a reflection of resilience, courage, and the knowledge that together they could face anything. He had wandered the West for so long, searching for nothing and avoiding everything. Yet here, in her presence, he realized what he had been missing all along. Someone to fight for, someone to protect, and someone to come home to. Hours later, the outline of the ranch appeared on the horizon. The house, battered but standing, the fences leaning in places but still intact, and the fields stretching out with promise of life and work. They belonged to her, but in that moment, they belonged to both of them. Jace guided their horses toward the gates, the tension of the past days slowly easing with each step. Ellery dismounted first, her boots crunching in the dry earth. She turned to him, eyes shining. "We made it. We did," he said, voice low but steady. "And we're just getting started." As they walked toward the house, the sun climbing higher, it cast their shadows long across the land, a cowboy and his bride, no longer running, no longer begging, and no longer alone. Ahead of them lay hard work, long days, and challenges, but also laughter, safety, and the kind of peace that only comes when two people choose each other against all odds. For Jace Calder, the lonely cowboy, and Ellery Grant, the runaway bride, the horizon was no longer a place to escape to, it was a place to belong. And as they stepped into their future, side by side, they finally understood what it meant to come home.